As a woman of 33, my life shattered at my mother's funeral. Not because of the grief, but because of what happened right before they closed the casket. The trembling priest, Father Gregory, pulled me into the shadows of the vestibule and pressed a yellowed birth certificate and a rusted brass key into my palm. "Do not go home, Maya," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the altar. "Search locker 6 at the central station." Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father, Bishop Marcus. "Ignore that old fool and get in the family car immediately. Do not embarrass me today." Inside that dark locker, I uncovered a secret that would destroy his entire empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to bury your truth. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled the ultimate betrayal. The organ music swelled through the massive sanctuary of the megachurch my father built. I stood near the entrance clutching my simple black purse. Suddenly, a heavy hand shoved my shoulder, pushing me forcibly toward the back rows. It was Brad, my sister Chloe's husband. He was a wealthy Wall Street investment banker who loved reminding everyone of his status and his perceived superiority over our family. "Let the real family sit up front," Brad muttered, smoothing his expensive tailored suit. "Your cheap outfit is ruining the aesthetic for the cameras." I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I stopped affording myself years ago. Growing up in this massive house of worship, I learned early on that my sister Chloe was the golden child. She got the designer dresses, the private tutors, and the unconditional praise. I got the leftovers and the constant reminder that I was the difficult, ungrateful child who never quite fit in. As a forensic accountant, I dealt with cold, hard facts every single day. And the fact right now was that my own family was treating my mother's funeral like a heavily produced press conference. Up on the altar, my father, Bishop Marcus, wiped away a perfectly timed tear. The congregation wept with him. He was a master performer, manipulating the crowd with practiced ease. But his performance cracked for a fraction of a second when his eyes locked onto mine. He saw Father Gregory pulling me into the side corridor. That was when the priest handed me the key and the birth certificate. I barely had time to unfold the heavy paper when my phone vibrated with my father's threatening message. The service ended with a booming choir performance. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and the blinding afternoon sun hit my face. The church security team, led by a man who had intimidated me since childhood, began directing people toward the lavish reception. I needed to get to the central train station. I needed to know what was in locker 6. I turned toward the street, but Brad blocked my path. His tall frame hovered over me, casting a dark shadow. "Where do you think you are going, Maya?" he demanded, his voice dripping with that familiar, arrogant tone. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. Marcus said, "You need to get in the limousine. Stop acting like a ghetto trash rebel and do what you are told for once in your miserable life." For 33 years I had swallowed my pride. I had let them belittle me. I had let them treat me like a stranger in my own home. But the rough metal of the locker key pressing against my palm gave me a sudden surge of absolute clarity. I looked Brad dead in the eye. "Take your hands off me," I said, my voice dangerously low. He scoffed and tightened his grip, attempting to drag me toward the waiting stretch limousine, where Chloe was already waving impatiently. "Oh, come on, Maya, do not make a scene." I did not make a scene. I made a move. I drove my knee sharply into his shin right below his kneecap. Brad gasped loudly, releasing my arm and stumbling backward into a large, decorative flower arrangement. Several churchgoers gasped in horror. "Have a blessed day, Brad," I said loudly enough for the nearest deacons to hear. Without missing a single beat, I sprinted toward the curb and threw open the door of a waiting yellow taxi. I jumped into the back seat and slammed the door just as my father's security guards started running toward me. "Drive," I shouted to the driver. "Take me to the central train station now." The cab ride was a chaotic blur of flashing city lights and my own racing heartbeat. I kept looking out the rear window, making sure the black SUVs belonging to my father's security team were not following my path. When the cab finally pulled up to the main entrance of the central train station, I handed the driver a $50 bill and rushed inside. The station was massive and overwhelming, echoing loudly with the sounds of departure announcements and hundreds of rushing commuters. I scanned the concourse area before making a move. My blood ran completely cold. Standing near the central ticket counters were two broad-shouldered men wearing crisp, dark suits. I recognized them immediately from the sanctuary. They were the most ruthless members of my father's personal security detail, the exact same men he used to secretly intimidate church members who asked questions about their weekly tithes. They were already aggressively sweeping the station looking for me. I pulled my dark blazer up over my head to hide my face and smoothly slipped into a large, loud crowd of international tourists moving rapidly toward the eastern terminal. I kept my head down, matching their hurried pace and blending into the morning traffic. The two security men were too focused on monitoring the main sliding glass doors, completely missing my discreet escape as I bypassed their line of sight. I hurried away from the main hall and darted down a dimly lit service corridor toward the long-term luggage storage area. My breath hitched in my chest as I saw the endless rows of battered gray metal doors. I frantically scanned the painted numbers until I found the right one. Locker 6. My hands shook uncontrollably as I gripped the rusted brass key Father Gregory had pressed into my palm. I forced it into the lock and turned it with a harsh metallic grinding sound. The small square door popped open, revealing the dark interior. Inside there was no cash and no hidden jewelry. There was only a thick leather-bound ledger worn around the edges, and a sealed manila envelope tucked neatly underneath it. I pulled the items out with trembling fingers and leaned heavily against the cold tile wall, opening the sealed envelope first. My breath caught sharply in my throat. It was a certified birth certificate. The paper was extremely old and fragile to the touch, but the precise names printed in black ink on that document made my entire world stop spinning and crash down violently around me. Mother Elena Sterling, Father David Sterling, Child Maya Sterling. Not Marcus. Not the cruel, manipulative man who had raised me and constantly told me I was a difficult adopted burden to his family. I dropped the envelope and quickly opened the heavy leather ledger. Being a forensic accountant meant I naturally read complex financial records the exact same way other people read fiction novels. And this specific ledger was an absolute horror story written in red ink. It detailed massive illegal transfers of corporate wealth dating all the way back to the fall of 1991. It explicitly showed a heavily guarded trust fund currently worth $40 million in prime commercial real estate assets. All of it legally belonged to the Sterling family, my actual real family. I flipped the yellowed pages faster and faster, my eyes scanning the narrow margins where Father Gregory had written hasty warning notes. Marcus was not a respected bishop back then. He was simply my parents' greedy personal accountant. The detailed notes explained exactly how Marcus had systematically embezzled millions from their private business accounts over 2 years. When my parents finally discovered his financial crimes, he deliberately arranged for their car brakes to fail entirely on a steep, dangerous mountain road. They died instantly in a tragic staged accident. Marcus immediately swooped in as the loyal family friend and officially adopted me just to gain total legal control of the estate. He subsequently rebranded himself as a charismatic holy man, specifically to launder the stolen real estate money through his new tax-exempt church enterprise. A violent mix of deep grief and explosive rage boiled intensely in my chest. I placed the damning ledger and the original birth certificate into my purse. I needed to find a safe place and formulate a strategic legal plan to destroy them. Just as I turned around to leave the isolated storage corridor, my cell phone vibrated violently inside my coat pocket. The bright caller ID flashed my sister's name, Chloe. I accepted the call and raised the phone to my ear without saying a word. Chloe's voice was frantic, loud, and dripping with fake concern. Brad called the police and reported you for stealing Mom's heirloom ring. Get home now. I ended the call and shoved the phone deep into my pocket. My hands were no longer shaking. The paralyzing fear that had controlled my entire life was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. I hailed another cab and directed the driver to my father's sprawling suburban estate. When I pushed open the heavy oak front doors, the thick scent of fried chicken, baked macaroni and cheese, and collard greens hit the air. It was the traditional repast, a time for family and friends to gather after the burial. But as I walked down the long marble hallway, the low hum of polite conversation immediately stopped. Dozens of eyes turned to stare at me. Aunts, uncles, and church elders who had known me since I was a little girl glared with undisguised judgment. I could hear their harsh whispers echoing in the sudden silence. That is her, the ungrateful one. Did you hear what she did to poor Brad at the church? She has absolutely no shame. I kept my chin high and my shoulders back, ignoring the toxic gossip as I stepped down into the sunken living room. Brad was standing near the fireplace, looking incredibly smug with his arms crossed over his tailored suit. Chloe stood right next to him, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. "Well, look who finally decided to show up!" Brad sneered, his voice echoing loudly across the room. "The police are already on their way, Maya. Did you really think you could slip into Mom's dressing room and steal her diamond heirloom ring while we were mourning? You are completely pathetic." Before I could even respond to his ridiculous accusation, my father emerged from his private study. Marcus walked slowly into the center of the room, wearing his clerical collar projecting an aura of divine authority and deep sorrow. He raised his hands, palms facing outward to quiet the whispering crowd. "Please, family, do not attack her," Marcus said, his voice trembling with perfectly faked emotion. "Maya has always been our troubled child. She is lost and clearly struggling with the devil in her heart today. We must not judge her. We must pray for her soul." A collective murmur of agreement and sympathy rippled through the room. A few older church mothers even shouted amen. Marcus looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile playing on his lips. "Just hand the ring over to your sister Maya. We can handle this privately. I will ask the officers to drop the charges if you just repent and obey your family." I stood my ground and slowly scanned the room. My training as a forensic auditor taught me to always look past the obvious distractions and focus entirely on the hidden details. That is when I finally saw it clearly. Resting on a leather ottoman just inches away from Brad's expensive Italian leather shoes was a sleek, black carbon fiber briefcase. It was slightly unzipped. Most people would just see a rich banker's luggage, but my trained eyes caught the distinct silver embossed logo stamped near the handle and the header of a document peeking out from the top folder. Vanguard Holdings. It was the exact same shell company listed in the secret ledger I had just found inside Locker 6. The very same fake corporation Marcus had used to funnel my real parents' $40 million real estate trust fund into his own pockets. And Brad was clearly the investment banker orchestrating the final legal steps to launder the stolen assets. I walked slowly toward the long dining table, completely ignoring my father's dramatic religious performance. I picked up a crystal pitcher and calmly poured myself a tall glass of sweet tea. The ice clinked loudly in the silent, tense room. I took a slow, deliberate sip before turning to face my arrogant brother-in-law. "I did not steal a ring, Brad," I said, my voice steady and carrying clearly across the large living room. "But I am incredibly curious about something else. Why exactly are you carrying Vanguard Holdings financial documents to a family funeral?" The color instantly drained from Brad's face. He stiffened and instinctively took a half step in front of the briefcase, as if his body could hide the massive corporate crime sitting on the ottoman. Chloe looked confused, but Marcus gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles turning completely white. Vanguard Holdings, I repeated, letting the name hang heavily in the air. Is not that the exact same offshore shell company currently under federal investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for massive money laundering? I took another sip of my sweet tea and smiled confidently at him. So, Brad, tell the family. What exactly are you hiding in that briefcase right now? Absolute panic flashed violently in Brad's eyes. He choked on his own breath, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He instinctively clutched the heavy black briefcase tighter against his chest, as if my mere words could physically pry it open. Chloe looked wildly between her husband and me, her perfectly manicured hands trembling. Before Brad could stumble through a pathetic lie, Marcus stepped forward. The gentle, grieving father act vanished entirely, replaced by the ruthless, calculating businessman I had secretly feared my entire life. That is quite enough, Maya, he snapped, his deep voice echoing with terrifying authority. You are clearly exhausted and speaking absolute nonsense. Come with me into my study right now. We have private family matters to discuss. Marcus grabbed my elbow with a vice-like grip, his thick fingers digging into my flesh. He practically dragged me away from the dining room, with Brad and Chloe hurrying nervously right behind us. As soon as we crossed the threshold of his private mahogany study, Marcus slammed the heavy double doors shut and turned the brass lock, clicking it loudly into place. The sudden silence in the room was suffocating. Marcus marched straight over to his massive vintage desk and violently yanked open the top drawer. He pulled out a thick stack of crisp legal papers bound in a blue folder and slammed them down onto the polished wood surface. This is your mother's final will and testament, Marcus demanded, his voice dropping to a vicious low hiss. I had my attorneys draft it last month. Since you have decided to be an ungrateful nuisance today, we are skipping the formalities. Read it and sign the bottom line immediately. I stepped forward and calmly picked up the document. I did not need to read the entire thing to understand the trap. I flipped straight to the distribution of assets. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon and landed on the final numbers. $5,000. That was my entire inheritance. The remaining assets, the properties, the bank accounts, and the hidden offshore trusts were explicitly being transferred directly into Vanguard Holdings to be managed exclusively by Chloe and Brad. It was a complete and total legal erasure of my existence. $5,000, I said out loud, keeping my voice perfectly flat. You stole $40 million from my real parents, and you are trying to buy my silence with $5,000. Marcus froze, his eyes widening in genuine shock. He had no idea I knew the exact dollar amount. But before he could process my statement, Brad stepped forward, regaining his arrogant Wall Street swagger. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and looked down at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. You really think you are smart, Maya? Brad sneered, flexing his white privilege and financial power like a weapon. Let me explain how the real world works. You are a nobody. I have a team of corporate lawyers on retainer who make more in an hour than you make in a year. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will personally make sure my legal team ties you up in civil court for the next 2 decades. We will drain every single cent you have. We will ruin your credit, your career, and your miserable little life. You cannot afford to fight me, so be a good girl, pick up the pen and sign the damn paper. Chloe chimed in from the corner, crossing her arms tightly. You should be grateful we are giving you anything at all. You never belonged in this family anyway. I stood silently, taking in their supreme arrogance. They genuinely believed I was just a frightened little girl they could easily bully into submission. They thought my silence was weakness. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out my silver-engraved fountain pen. I clicked the cap off and leaned over the massive desk. Brad smiled triumphantly, exchanging a knowing glance with Marcus. They thought they had won. I placed the pen on the thick paper, but I did not write my name. Instead, my fingers quickly separated the final original signature page from the thick staple. In one fluid, seamless motion, I folded the heavy parchment paper and slipped it directly into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Brad shouted, stepping forward aggressively. I stood up completely straight and capped my pen, sliding it back into my purse. I am taking this signature page as evidence, I said, flashing a bright, genuine smile. I will have the senior partners at my firm review this document for fraudulent coercion tomorrow morning. Oh, did I forget to tell you all the good news? I was just promoted to senior auditor at Deloitte. Have a wonderful evening, family. I will see you all in court. The morning sun felt heavy as I walked into my usual downtown coffee shop, trying to clear my head before executing my next move. The scent of roasted espresso usually brought me peace, but today my stomach was tied in tight knots. I approached the counter, ordered a simple black coffee, and handed my primary debit card to the barista. A loud, aggressive beep echoed from the card reader. Declined. I frowned, assuming it was a simple bank error. I dug into my leather wallet, pulling out my backup corporate credit card. Another loud beep. Declined again. The barista looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance as a line of impatient commuters began forming behind me. I apologized quietly, handed the barista a crumpled $5 bill from my coat pocket, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. I quickly opened my mobile banking application on my phone. The screen flashed bright red with a harsh administrative error message. Account suspended pending legal review. I clicked into the extended details and felt a cold wave of absolute realization wash over me. A joint power of attorney injunction had been legally executed at 6 o'clock this morning. Marcus and Brad had actually done it. They had used a corrupt family court judge to completely freeze my personal and professional bank accounts, locking me out of my own hard-earned money. They wanted to starve me into submission before I could even hire legal representation. Just as I was staring at the zero balance on my screen, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was a picture message from my sister Chloe. She was posing on the polished teak deck of a massive luxury yacht, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding a crystal glass filled with a bright orange mimosa. The caption underneath the photo was short and vicious. Should have signed the will, poor girl. Have fun walking to work. I stared at the image of my sister laughing in the sun. For 33 years, I had been deeply conditioned to believe that I was the ultimate financial burden of our family. I had paid my own way through college working double shifts at a diner, while Chloe was handed absolutely everything on a silver platter. Every time I asked Marcus for help paying for my textbooks, he told me the church was struggling and I needed to learn how to be an independent woman. Now the ugly, horrific truth was staring me right in the face. I was never the burden. I was the bank. My stolen $40 million trust fund had paid for that yacht charter. My murdered parents had unknowingly funded every single European vacation, every luxury sports car, and every custom designer dress Chloe had ever owned. I was the despised scapegoat who had secretly financed the lavish, untroubled lifestyle of the golden child. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have broken down crying on the crowded sidewalk and begged Marcus for a small allowance. But I was not a normal person. I was a senior forensic auditor, and I was absolutely furious. I did not shed a single tear. I walked straight back to my apartment building and marched up the stairs. I completely bypassed the casual clothes in my closet and pulled out my sharpest charcoal gray tailored suit. I pinned my hair back into a tight professional bun, applied a bold red lipstick, and grabbed my heavy leather briefcase. I was not going to fight them in a rigged family courtroom where they currently held the financial advantage. I was going to fight them on their own turf. I took the subway straight down to the financial district. I walked confidently into the towering glass and steel lobby of Brad's elite investment firm. The massive building practically screamed white privilege, corporate greed, and old money. The ceilings were high and the floors were pristine white marble. I approached the sleek front desk where a polished receptionist looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Good morning," I said, my voice projecting crisp, unwavering authority. "I am here to see Richard Sterling, the senior managing partner of this firm. Do you have a scheduled appointment?" the receptionist asked, her tone dripping with heavy condescension. I do not, I replied, resting my hands flat on the cool marble counter and leaning in closely. But you are going to call up to his top floor office right now anyway. Tell him Maya is here, and tell him I want to urgently discuss the massive financial discrepancy regarding the Vanguard Holdings offshore routing number ending in 4829. I watched the color completely drain from the receptionist's face. She recognized that highly classified account number immediately. It was the exact same numerical sequence I had memorized from the top sheet of the document, peeking out of Brad's briefcase the day before. The receptionist nervously picked up the heavy desk phone and dialed a short extension. She whispered frantically into the receiver, her eyes darting nervously back to me. She hung up the phone and swallowed hard. Mr. Sterling will see you immediately, she said, pointing a shaky finger toward the private executive elevators. I smiled politely and walked away, leaving her entirely speechless. I pressed the silver button for the private elevator and waited. When the polished doors slid open, I stepped inside the mahogany-paneled cab and watched the numbers climb higher and higher. Brad thought he could use his money and his status to completely erase my existence. He thought he could freeze my accounts and force me to surrender out of pure desperation. But he severely underestimated the sheer willpower of a woman who finally knew her true worth. As the elevator chimed and the doors opened to the penthouse floor, I took a deep breath. The real war was about to begin. The elevator doors slid completely open, revealing a sprawling floor of glass offices and rows of sleek trading desks. Analysts in custom suits rushed around clutching tablets and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. It was a temple of modern wealth. I stepped directly onto the plush carpet, my heels sinking slightly with each confident stride. I spotted Brad almost immediately. He was standing inside a corner glass conference room, laughing loudly with two other junior partners, holding a steaming cup of coffee. When he turned his head and saw me walking toward him, the smile instantly vanished from his face. His pale skin flushed with sudden panic. He slammed his coffee cup down on the conference table, spilling hot liquid everywhere, and rushed out the glass door to intercept me. "What the hell are you doing here?" Brad hissed, keeping his voice low but filled with venom. He grabbed my arm just like he had at the funeral, but this time I yanked it away so violently that he stumbled forward. "Do not ever touch me again," I said, my voice perfectly steady. Brad frantically looked around, seeing a few analysts turning their heads to watch the commotion. His embarrassment quickly morphed into defensive rage. He waved his hand aggressively toward a pair of broad security guards standing near the reception corridor. "Security, get over here right now!" Brad shouted, his voice echoing across the quiet trading floor. "This woman is trespassing." I stood my ground, smoothing the lapels of my charcoal gray suit. "I am not trespassing, Brad. I am here to see Richard Sterling." Brad let out a harsh, mocking laugh, attempting to rally his nearby colleagues to his side. He leaned back and put his hands on his hips, shaking his head with exaggerated disbelief. "Look at you, Maya! You freeze your own bank accounts by making stupid financial decisions, and now you come to my place of work to harass me." He looked over at the gathering crowd of wealthy white bankers and gave them a knowing, exasperated look. "Please excuse my sister-in-law, gentlemen. She is just another crazy, angry black woman throwing a pathetic temper tantrum because she wants a handout from her successful family." A few of his colleagues chuckled awkwardly, looking at me with undisguised pity and disdain. The two security guards approached me, placing their heavy hands on their utility belts, preparing to physically escort me out. Brad smiled triumphantly, fully believing his calculated racial microaggression had successfully discredited me in front of his peers. He wanted me to act out the exact stereotype he had just loudly projected onto me. Instead, I remained incredibly still. I channeled every ounce of my professional training. I did not raise my voice in anger, but I projected it with the precise, cutting clarity of a lead auditor identifying a massive corporate fraud. "I am not here for a handout, Brad," I announced, my voice ringing clearly across the entire penthouse floor, cutting through the awkward silence like a surgical blade. I am here because as a senior forensic auditor, I have a legal fiduciary duty to report massive financial crimes. The murmurs around the room instantly stopped. The security guards hesitated completely, unsure of what to do next. Just then, the heavy oak door of the largest corner office opened, and Richard Sterling, a tall, imposing man with silver hair, walked out. He adjusted his expensive glasses, looking extremely annoyed by the sudden disruption in his firm. "What exactly is going on out here?" Richard demanded, looking back and forth between Brad and me. I locked eyes with the managing partner, completely ignoring Brad, who was now sweating profusely. "Mr. Sterling," I said clearly, "I am Maya. I am the auditor who requested the urgent meeting regarding your associate Brad. I have reason to believe he is using this prestigious firm to illegally route millions of dollars in untaxed charity funds from a local megachurch directly into a restricted offshore Cayman Island account belonging to Vanguard Holdings. And I have the exact routing numbers ending in 4829. The entire floor went deathly quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Accusing a Wall Street banker of offshore money laundering in front of his managing partner, and the entire floor was the absolute nuclear option. Brad's face drained of all blood, turning a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Richard Sterling stopped walking. His annoyed expression shifted immediately into a mask of cold, ruthless corporate calculation. He looked at Brad, and then looked back at me, taking in my professional attire and my unwavering confidence. The mention of Vanguard Holdings and illegal Cayman accounts was a massive red flag that could tank a firm overnight. Brad Richards said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Get into my office, right this second." Brad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He began walking slowly toward the corner office, looking like a man walking straight to the execution block. As he passed by me, he leaned in close so only I could hear him. "You are dead, Maya," he whispered, his breath hot and shaking with pure hatred. I did not flinch. I turned my head slightly, looking directly into his terrified eyes, and flashed him a brilliant, genuine smile. "I am just getting started, Brad." I walked out of that glass building with my head held high, ignoring the panicked whispers trailing behind me. By the time Sunday rolled around, the tension in my family had reached an absolute boiling point. Every first Sunday of the month was mandatory family dinner at Big Mama's house. It was a sprawling brick home in the historic district, a place that had been our family's sanctuary for generations. It was the house where we celebrated every birthday, holiday, and graduation. When I pushed open the heavy wooden front door, the familiar scent of collard greens, baked ham, and sweet potato pie usually made me feel deeply grounded. But today the air inside felt completely toxic. I walked into the crowded living room, and the lively chatter instantly died. Dozens of relatives were packed onto the floral sofas and folding chairs. Marcus stood by the fireplace holding a plate of food, holding court like the benevolent patriarch. Brad and Chloe sat close to him, looking like traumatized victims. My Aunt Denise stepped right in front of me, blocking my path to the kitchen. "Have you completely lost your mind, Maya?" she demanded, her voice sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Going down to that white man's corporate office and acting a fool, you are embarrassing this entire family." Marcus sighed heavily, shaking his head with practiced disappointment. "I tried to warn you all," he said smoothly, addressing the room. "Maya has let corporate greed and jealousy poison her soul. She went to Brad's office and threatened his livelihood just because she is bitter about her mother's passing and the legal will. She is actively trying to tear her sister's marriage apart." A low murmur of agreement rippled through my aunts and uncles. My Uncle Ray pointed a stern finger at me. "You need to know your place, young lady," he scolded harshly. "Brad has done nothing but help this family financially. You need to march over there and apologize to him right now before you ruin everything we have built." I looked around the room at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. For my entire life, they had eagerly swallowed every single lie my father fed them. They preferred the comfortable fiction of Marcus the holy savior over the difficult reality of Maya the scapegoat. I looked at Big Mama sitting in her worn leather recliner in the corner. She looked tired, her frail hands gripping the armrests tightly. "I am not apologizing to anyone," I said, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through the angry grumbles of my relatives. "Brad and Marcus are not the victims here. You all want to talk about ruining this family. Let us talk about what is actually happening to this very house." The room went dead silent. Marcus stiffened his shoulders, his eyes narrowing defensively. "What are you talking about, Maya?" Big Mama asked, her voice trembling slightly as she looked up at me. I took a step toward the center of the room, making sure everyone could hear me clearly. "I am talking about the fact that your beloved Holy Patriarch secretly took out a massive second mortgage on this historic property 3 years ago," I announced. "He forged your signature on the banking documents, Big Mama. He took all the equity out of this family home and funneled it directly into his offshore accounts to fund his own lifestyle. And because he stopped making the monthly payments 6 months ago, this house is actively facing immediate foreclosure." "That is an outrageous, demonic lie," Marcus roared, his face turning a deep shade of purple with sudden explosive rage. "How dare you come into your grandmother's home on a Sunday and spread such filthy slander? I am a respected man of God. Do not listen to her. She is mentally unstable and trying to destroy us." The family immediately started shouting at me, calling me crazy, disrespectful, and deeply ungrateful. I did not argue with them. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket, swiped the screen, and tapped the screen mirroring button. A loud, electronic beep echoed from the massive smart TV mounted directly above the fireplace. The Sunday football game vanished instantly. It was replaced by a high-definition scanned copy of a legal document from the county clerk. "Notice of default and foreclosure sale." Big Mama's name was boldly printed at the top, but the signature clearly belonged to Marcus. The total amount owed was staggering. The entire room erupted into absolute chaotic screaming. Aunts began crying uncontrollably. Uncle Ray dropped his plate of food right onto the carpet. Big Mama gasped, clutching her chest in pure horror. "Shut it off!" Marcus bellowed, lunging toward the television. "Turn that screen off right now!" He spun around violently and stormed toward me. Before I could even raise my hands to defend myself, he swung his arm back and struck me incredibly hard across the face. The sharp crack of his hand hitting my cheek silenced the entire room. The sharp crack of his hand hitting my cheek silenced the entire room. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow. A dull ringing filled my ears, and the metallic taste of blood instantly pooled in my mouth. Big Mama let out a horrified gasp, but no one else moved a single muscle. Chloe just stood there watching me with a cold, satisfied smirk. Marcus lowered his shaking hand, his chest heaving as he tried to mask his sudden violence with righteous indignation. He expected me to fall to the floor crying. He expected me to finally break. I slowly turned my head back to face him, wiping a thin trail of blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand. I did not shed a single tear. I looked directly into his panicked eyes and let him see the absolute coldness in mine. "You just signed your prison sentence, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I turned and walked straight out the front door, leaving my family standing in their own lies. I climbed into my sedan and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My cheek was throbbing, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning resolve fueling my every move. I needed to get back to my apartment and finalize my legal strategy, but as I turned onto my street, my stomach dropped completely. A massive pile of clothes, books, and broken furniture was dumped recklessly onto the wet city sidewalk. My heart pounded as I pulled closer. I recognized my custom-upholstered armchair sitting upside down in the gutter. My professional blazers were scattered across the dirty concrete. Standing near the entrance of my building was the angry building manager holding a clipboard accompanied by 2 armed security guards. I slammed the car into park and marched right up to them demanding an explanation. The manager did not even look me in the eye. He just shoved a hastily typed eviction notice toward my chest. He said the property management company had just been acquired by Vanguard Holdings an hour ago. The new owners executed an immediate emergency eviction, claiming I had violated an obscure morality clause in my lease agreement. Brad had used his elite Wall Street real estate connections to illegally throw me out onto the street on a Sunday evening. He wanted to strip away my shelter and completely break my spirit. I stood on the sidewalk watching strangers step over my personal belongings. I had no access to my bank accounts, and now I had absolutely no home. But I refused to let Brad and Marcus see me surrender. I spent the next hour quietly salvaging my most important audit documents and a few warm coats, throwing them into the trunk of my car. I drove to a brightly lit 24-hour supermarket parking lot on the outskirts of the city and locked all the doors. I reclined my driver's seat, wrapping myself in a thick wool coat to fight off the biting evening chill. The glow of the streetlights illuminated the dark interior of my car as I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy leather ledger from locker 6. I needed to find a specific pattern, a missing link that would definitively tie Marcus and Brad to the Vanguard fraud before the morning. I traced my finger down the columns of numbers, completely absorbed in the financial data. As I flipped to the very last page of the ledger, I noticed a slight tear in the thick binding. I gently peeled back the worn leather cover. Hidden underneath was a tiny square of yellow paper held down by a piece of clear tape. Written in faded black ink was a 10-digit phone number. My heart raced. This was not a random note. This was a deliberate lifeline left behind for whoever found the ledger. I immediately pulled out my cell phone and punched in the 10 digits, my fingers trembling slightly. The line rang once, twice, and then connected with a sharp click. I held my breath, pressing the phone tightly against my ear. A raspy, breathless voice answered immediately on the other end. "I told you not to go home, Maya," the voice whispered urgently. I sat straight up, my blood running completely cold. I knew it was Father Gregory. I tried to speak, but he cut me off. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," he pleaded, his voice thick with genuine terror. "They know you opened locker 6. They know you have the ledger, and they have just hired someone to silence you permanently. You must get out of that supermarket parking lot right now." I slammed the gas pedal and sped out of the parking lot. Father Gregory was absolutely right. If Marcus and Brad were willing to evict me and freeze my accounts, hiring a thug to silence me was the next logical step. They were terrified because I possessed the physical ledger. To guarantee convictions, I needed digital proof matching those handwritten pages. I needed the current routing numbers connecting church funds to Vanguard Holdings. There was only one place Marcus kept his digital files: the church server room. I parked 3 blocks away in a quiet alley to avoid security patrols. The massive church campus was completely silent. Growing up, I cleaned my father's lavish office every Saturday morning. Because of that, I knew every blind spot in the security camera system. I also knew the keypad code to the heavy steel service door had not been changed in a decade. I slipped through the shadows, approached the door, and punched in the code. The lock clicked open. I crept silently down the dark hallway, bypassing the sanctuary, and slipped into the server room. The room was freezing cold and filled with the humming of massive computer towers. I pulled an encrypted flash drive from my bag and plugged it into the terminal. As an auditor, I knew exactly how to bypass the administrative password using a backdoor sequence I watched the IT director input years ago. A progress bar appeared on the screen as I began cloning the database. Just as the digital progress bar hit 70%, the heavy server room door swung wide open. Standing in the doorway, clutching a bright red designer handbag and wearing a luxurious silk trench coat, was my sister Chloe. She froze, staring at me in absolute shock. "What the hell are you doing in here, Maya?" she demanded, stepping quickly into the room and letting the door swing shut behind her. "Marcus sent me to shred some old files because he is paranoid about a federal audit. But look what we have here. The homeless orphan trying to steal church property." I did not move an inch, keeping my eyes locked onto the computer screen. I am just doing some late-night accounting, Chloe, I replied calmly. Chloe let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed in the cold room. You are completely pathetic, she sneered, walking closer to me, her high heels clicking loudly against the tile. You get thrown out onto the street like common garbage, and your first instinct is to come crawling back here to steal loose cash. Marcus was completely right about you. You have always been a desperate, jealous loser. You could never stand the fact that I was the favorite. I got the unconditional love, the family money, and the perfect, successful husband. You got absolutely nothing because you are nothing. The progress bar hit 90%. I turned to face her, crossing my arms. Your perfect, successful husband is going to a federal penitentiary, Chloe. And your perfect, luxurious life was entirely funded by my murdered parents. You are just a greedy parasite living off stolen trust fund money. Chloe's face contorted with sudden violent rage. The smug golden child mask completely vanished. How dare you speak to me like that, you jealous bitch, she screamed. She lunged toward a heavy wooden desk situated near the server racks and grabbed a solid brass paperweight shaped like a cross. She raised the heavy metal object high above her head and swung it violently, aiming directly for my skull. I reacted entirely on pure instinct. I ducked sharply to the right, and Chloe's own momentum carried her recklessly forward. The brass cross smashed heavily into the side of a metal server rack, sending sparks flying into the air. Before she could regain her balance, I grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her forcefully deeper into the narrow server closet. She stumbled backward, tripping over a thick bundle of black Ethernet cables and crashing hard onto the cold tile floor. I instantly reached over and pulled my completed flash drive from the terminal. You are going to pay for this! Maya Chloe screamed, frantically scrambling to her feet and lunging toward me again. I stepped quickly back out into the main hallway and grabbed the heavy metal door handle. No, Chloe. I said, my voice perfectly cold and steady. You are. I slammed the thick server room door shut in her face and immediately locked the heavy exterior deadbolt. Chloe's muffled screams and frantic pounding echoed loudly from inside the reinforced soundproof room. I dropped the master key into my pocket and walked briskly down the dark hallway, clutching the cloned hard drive. I finally had everything I needed to destroy their entire empire. I hurried back to my car parked in the dark alley and locked the doors. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but the cold weight of the flash drive in my hand anchored me. I drove away from the church campus, navigating the empty city streets until I found a cheap 24-hour diner on the edge of town. I needed strong black coffee and a secure wireless internet connection. I slid into a corner booth, opened my laptop, and immediately got to work. By the time the sun started to rise, I had painstakingly cross-referenced every single digital file from the church server with the handwritten entries in the Locker 6 ledger. The forensic money trail was absolutely undeniable. Millions of dollars in community donations, tithes, and tax-exempt funds were being systematically funneled straight into Brad's offshore accounts under the Vanguard Holdings umbrella. I had the exact routing numbers, the dates, and the authorized digital signatures. But while I was diligently building a bulletproof federal financial case, Marcus was busy building a brutal public execution. I took a sip of my bitter coffee and glanced up at the small television mounted high in the corner of the diner. The morning local news broadcast was playing and my stomach completely dropped. There on the screen was Marcus. He was standing behind his grand acrylic pulpit, looking directly into the camera with tears streaming down his face. He was delivering an emergency live broadcast to his massive congregation and the local media. The bold news headline crawling across the bottom of the screen read, "Beloved Bishop warns of demonic attack on ministry." His deep voice trembled with expertly calculated grief as he painted a horrific picture of me to the public. He told the thousands of viewers that I had violently attacked my sister Chloe in the middle of the night and locked her in a freezing room to die. He called me a deeply disturbed and demonic daughter who had completely lost her mind after my mother's passing. He claimed I was actively trying to destroy the holy sanctuary they had all built together out of pure spite and unholy jealousy. He begged his faithful followers to pray for me, but more importantly, he begged them to protect the church at all costs. He successfully weaponized the blind faith and trust of an entire community, turning them into his own personal army of vigilantes. Almost instantly, my cell phone began vibrating endlessly on the diner table. Marcus had somehow leaked my personal cell phone number to his most radical supporters online. Hundreds of text messages and voicemails flooded in from angry anonymous church members. The words were vile and terrifying. People I had grown up with, people I had served alongside at community food drives, were now sending me graphic death threats. They called me a witch, a traitor, and a violent criminal. They promised to find me and make me pay for hurting their beloved bishop and his innocent family. The sheer volume of hatred was suffocating. Amidst the avalanche of hateful messages, a single text popped up from a private number. I knew exactly who it was. Brad. The message was incredibly smug and dripping with his usual entitled white privilege. "We have the local media, the money, and the absolute power," he wrote. "You have a car trunk full of cheap clothes and an entire city that wants you dead. You cannot win this, Maya. Surrender the ledger and turn yourself in, or you will not survive the week." I stared at the bright screen of my phone, reading his arrogant words over and over again. Brad honestly thought public opinion could somehow override federal law. He thought loud voices and intimidating threats could erase cold, hard accounting facts. He fundamentally misunderstood the type of war we were fighting. I did not shed a tear, and I did not bother replying to his ridiculous message. Instead, I turned my attention back to my laptop screen. I opened a highly secure encrypted email portal that I used for high-level corporate audits. I carefully attached the high-resolution scanned pages of the Locker 6 ledger, the original birth certificate, and the massive data file containing every single fraudulent wire transfer I had pulled from the church server. I typed in the direct confidential email address for the regional director of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I took one final deep breath, hit the send button, and watched the progress bar quickly fill the screen until the encrypted file disappeared into the digital ether. The authorities now had everything they needed to dismantle the fake holy empire Marcus had built on my real parents' graves. Let Brad keep his media and his money. I had the absolute truth, and I was bringing the federal government straight to his arrogant front door. Less than 2 hours after I sent that encrypted email to the federal authorities, my burner phone rang. It was not another anonymous death threat from a brainwashed church member. It was Marcus. His tone had completely changed from the fiery, demonic preaching I had just watched on the local morning news. He sounded exhausted and remarkably cautious. He asked me to meet him at an exclusive high-end steakhouse downtown for a private, peaceful conversation. He claimed he wanted to stop the public bleeding and find a quiet compromise that would benefit us both. I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I needed to look him in the eye one last time before the federal hammer dropped. I agreed to the meeting. I walked into the dimly lit restaurant wearing the wrinkled suit I had slept in. The maitre d' led me to a private corner booth hidden away from the main dining floor. Marcus was already sitting there sipping a glass of expensive red wine. But he was not alone. Sitting directly across from him, looking like a smug predator in a custom suit, was Brad. I slid into the booth, keeping my posture straight. "I see you brought your attack dog, Marcus," I said calmly, placing my purse on the table. Marcus offered a tight fake smile. "Brad is here strictly in his capacity as my financial advisor and legal counsel, Maya. We want to put an end to this ugly family feud right now. We want to offer you an olive branch." Marcus reached inside his jacket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He placed it on the table and slid it across the wood until it touched my hands. I did not open it. I knew exactly what kind of manipulative game they were playing. "Go ahead and look inside, Maya." Brad sneered, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest. "It is a certified cashier's check made out directly to you. $500,000. All you have to do is slide that rusted locker key, the leather ledger, and every single document you stole across this table right now. Then you walk away, and you never speak to the press or this family ever again." I stared at the envelope. $500,000 was a massive amount of money to anyone else. It was enough to buy a beautiful new house, replace my stolen belongings, and start a completely new life far away from their toxic grip. Marcus leaned forward, folding his hands in a prayer-like gesture. "Please, Maya," he whispered, his voice dripping with fake paternal concern. "Take the blessing. You have clearly been through so much trauma. I forgive you for your confusion. Let me help you start over. You can open your own accounting firm somewhere else. Just give me back my church property." Brad scoffed loudly, completely dropping the professional lawyer act. "Let us be brutally honest here, Maya. You are currently homeless. Your bank accounts are completely frozen. You have an angry city that hates your guts right now. This check is a massive gift. Take the money, Maya. It is substantially more wealth than someone like you will ever see. You are not equipped to handle a corporate war against us. You do not have the pedigree or the stamina. Take the cash right now and go straight back to being a pathetic nobody." I sat in silence, letting Brad's arrogant words hang in the air. They genuinely thought I was just a bitter, jealous little girl who could be easily bought off with a tiny fraction of my own stolen inheritance. They thought throwing a bone to a starving dog would make the dog loyal again. They were completely wrong. I finally reached out and placed my right index finger incredibly firmly on top of the thick white envelope. I did not break eye contact with Marcus as I slowly pushed the heavy check back across the wooden table. "I do not want $500,000, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. "I want the $40 million you violently stole from my real parents. I want every single dime of the trust fund you funneled through your fake holy empire." Brad slammed his fist on the table. "You are out of your mind," he hissed, his face turning bright red. I ignored him entirely, keeping my eyes locked on the man who had lied to me for 33 years. "And there is one thing I want, Marcus," I continued, completely unfazed by Brad's sudden outburst. "I want the Vanguard Holdings corporate merger to completely fail tomorrow evening, and I want to sit back and watch you both burn." I stood up from the plush leather booth and walked away without looking back. I left the white envelope sitting right there on the table between them. As I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, I knew exactly what would happen next. Marcus and Brad were completely desperate. They realized they could not buy my silence, and they knew time was rapidly running out before the federal authorities started asking serious questions about their church finances. When powerful men realize their money cannot save them, they immediately resort to dirty tactics. They needed to completely destroy my professional credibility. If I was suddenly arrested for a severe felony, the Internal Revenue Service might dismiss my encrypted email as the frantic revenge plot of a desperate criminal. In this city, the absolute fastest way to ruin a black professional is to involve corrupt police officers and illegal narcotics. I knew Marcus had several high-ranking precinct captains on his mega-church payroll. They attended his Sunday services and enjoyed his generous campaign donations. I knew a targeted setup was coming. I walked 3 blocks away from the restaurant to where I had parked my sedan. I unlocked the doors and slid into the driver's seat, but I did not start the engine. I sat in the dark thinking like a forensic auditor. You do not just run from a trap. You anticipate the trap and you use it to capture the hunter. They would easily track my car using the GPS locator Brad had likely installed when he illegally evicted me from my apartment building. They expected me to panic and drive aimlessly through the city, making myself an easy target for a staged traffic stop. Instead, I drove my car straight to the empty industrial district. I parked it directly under a bright, flickering street lamp on a deserted street, right across from an all-night diner. I grabbed my laptop bag, the Locker 6 ledger, and my burner phone. I locked the car doors and walked across the damp asphalt, stepping into the warm neon glow of the diner. I ordered a black coffee and sat in a dark window booth that gave me a perfect, unobstructed view of my parked sedan. I propped my cell phone against the sugar dispenser, turning the camera on and zooming in on my vehicle. I hit record. And then I simply waited. It took exactly 45 minutes. A dark, unmarked police cruiser rolled slowly down the empty street, its headlights cutting through the midnight fog. The cruiser pulled up right behind my parked sedan and stopped. Two men in dark police uniforms stepped out. They did not look like officers conducting a routine patrol. They looked like men executing a highly illegal paid favor. I watched through the diner window, holding my breath as the taller officer approached the driver's side of my car. He shined a bright tactical flashlight through the window, scanning the empty front seats. He looked around the deserted street, making sure there were no witnesses. He completely failed to notice the small camera lens recording his every move from the diner window across the street. The second officer pulled a thin metal tool from his utility belt and wedged it skillfully down into my car door frame. Within seconds, the lock popped up. The taller officer pulled the heavy car door open and leaned inside. I zoomed the camera in tighter on his hands. He reached deep into his bulky uniform jacket and pulled out a large clear plastic bag filled with a thick, white powdery substance. He quickly shoved the heavy bag of illegal narcotics directly underneath the driver's seat, pushing it far back so it would be perfectly hidden during a casual glance, but easily discovered during a targeted police raid. The second officer gave a quick thumbs up. They slammed my car door shut, locked it, and jogged back to their unmarked cruiser, speeding away into the night. They had just planted enough illegal narcotics in my vehicle to guarantee a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 20 years. They were probably calling Brad right now, telling him the trap was perfectly set and waiting for me to return to the car so they could swoop in for the dramatic public arrest. They thought they had just secured my permanent silence and destroyed my entire life. I sat alone in the quiet diner booth, lowering my cell phone and saving the crystal-clear, high-definition video file directly to my secure cloud server. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee and let out a soft laugh. They thought they were playing chess, but they were completely blind to the board. I had abandoned that car hours ago, anticipating their exact move. I now had video evidence of my father's corrupt police officers planting felony drug evidence in my vehicle. I picked up my burner phone and smiled. I dialed the raspy voice that had warned me earlier. Father Gregory answered on the first ring. I told him about the police setup and that I possessed the complete ledger along with the cloned digital files. He let out a heavy sigh of relief, but his voice remained tight with anxiety. He gave me an address for a small, forgotten parish on the extreme north side of the city, instructing me to meet him at the rear basement entrance. I left the diner, leaving my trapped car behind, and took 2 different buses to ensure I was not being followed. The North Side Parish was a crumbling stone building covered in thick ivy. I found the heavy wooden door at the bottom of the basement stairwell and knocked twice. The door creaked open, revealing Father Gregory holding a small flashlight. He quickly ushered me inside and locked 3 separate deadbolts behind us. The basement was lined with dusty archives and old wooden pews. Father Gregory looked incredibly old and fragile in the dim light, but his eyes burned with a fierce, determined energy. He guided me to a small wooden table illuminated by a single bare bulb. "You look so much like your mother, Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. I sat across from him, placing my heavy bag on the floor. "I need to know everything," I said softly. "Why did you wait 33 years to tell me the truth?" Father Gregory folded his trembling hands on the table. "I was a very young, newly ordained priest when your real parents came to me," he explained. "David and Elena Sterling were deeply faithful and generous people. They asked me to serve as the legal witness when they signed their final will and testament, officially placing their $40 million real estate empire into a secure trust for you. Marcus was simply their hired accountant, standing right there in the room with us. He seemed so loyal. But a week later, your parents were dead in that terrible car crash." Father Gregory looked down at his hands, his face etched with decades of heavy guilt. "Marcus came to me the very next day. He had already forged the adoption papers and the fake will. He brought those same ruthless security men with him. He put a loaded gun to my head and told me that if I ever breathed a word about the original trust fund, he would kill me, and he would kill you too. You were just a tiny, innocent baby, Maya. I was terrified. I took a vow of silence to protect your life, hoping that one day God would provide an opportunity for justice. I spent 3 decades hiding in plain sight, working quietly in the church, and secretly gathering whatever evidence I could. I hid the ledger in locker 6, hoping you would eventually find it. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his shaking fingers. You saved my life. Father Gregory, I said. And now we have the evidence to end his reign. I sent the encrypted files to the federal authorities tonight. Father Gregory shook his head urgently. The federal authorities move far too slowly, Maya. You do not have weeks or even days. You only have 24 hours. My brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Brad's Wall Street investment firm is finalizing a massive international corporate merger tomorrow evening. Father Gregory explained, his voice rising with panic. They are hosting an exclusive gala at the downtown Grand Hotel to celebrate the signing. Marcus and Brad have structured the deal so that Vanguard Holdings, the shell company holding your stolen trust fund, and the embezzled church donations will be entirely absorbed into a massive, legitimate foreign conglomerate. If Brad signs those final merger documents tomorrow night, the $40 million will be permanently laundered. The money will be scattered across 1,000 untraceable international equity funds. It will completely disappear, and Marcus will walk away as a billionaire. The federal agents will never be able to untangle the financial web once the merger is legally finalized. A cold chill ran down my spine. The fake police raid was not just about ruining my credibility. It was a desperate distraction to keep me locked in a jail cell while they quietly executed the final stage of their massive money laundering operation. They were trying to run out the clock. We have to stop the signing. I said, my mind racing through possible strategies. But that gala will be crawling with private security and armed guards. Brad knows exactly what I look like. I will never get past the front door. Father Gregory reached deep into his heavy woolen coat. A faint smile touched his lips for the first time. God works in mysterious ways, Maya. Marcus required me to handle the spiritual blessings for the event catering staff, which means I had access to the security credentials. He pulled his hand from his coat and placed a thick plastic card on the wooden table. It was a premium all-access VIP security badge for the corporate merger gala. It had a blank magnetic strip and an encrypted barcode. You have the financial proof, Father Gregory said, pushing the shiny badge across the table toward me. You have the truth. Now you have the key to walk right through their front door. Take this badge. Go to that gala tomorrow night. Bring them down, Maya. Bring them all down. I left the crumbling parish with the heavy plastic badge burning a hole in my pocket. I returned to the secluded diner and opened my laptop to finalize my digital evidence. The encrypted files from the church server were perfectly organized, but as I cross-referenced the final merger protocols, a glaring problem emerged. The corporate documents required a dual authentication process to authorize the final transfer of the $40 million. Brad had completely locked down the Vanguard Holdings executive portal. To publicly display the live accounts at the gala tonight and prove his guilt, I needed to mirror his phone screen to the main presentation server. And to do that, I absolutely needed his personal 6-digit passcode. I sat back in the vinyl booth and rubbed my tired eyes. Brad was paranoid about his digital security changing his corporate passwords weekly. But a man like Brad, who viewed his wife as a trophy, often shared his personal device access to maintain the illusion of absolute transparency. Chloe definitely knew his passcode. I just needed to make her give it to me. I pulled up a fake social media account I used for auditing background checks and searched for my sister's public profile. Chloe could never resist showing off her luxurious lifestyle. Her latest video story was posted 20 minutes ago. She was panning the camera across a pristine white marble room holding a glass of cucumber water. The caption proudly announced her all-day pampering session at the Grand Hotel Wellness Spa, preparing for the biggest night of her husband's career. I packed my laptop and headed straight downtown. I walked into the Grand Hotel lobby, bypassing the main spa reception desk by slipping through the service hallway reserved for housekeeping staff. I grabbed a thick white terry cloth robe from a laundry cart, wrapped it tightly around my street clothes, and pulled a fresh towel over my hair to hide my face. I walked confidently into the women's relaxation suite, letting the thick steam fill my lungs. I scanned the dimly lit private saunas until I spotted her through a glass door. Chloe was sitting alone on the top cedar bench with her eyes closed, wearing a luxurious clay face mask. I quietly opened the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The heat was incredibly intense. I sat down on the lower bench directly across from her. Chloe opened her eyes slowly. When her vision adjusted to the dim lighting and she recognized my face, she gasped sharply. She pulled her towel tighter around her chest and instinctively scooted back. "What are you doing in here, Maya?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the small space. "How did you get past security? Get out right now before I scream." I did not move. I slumped my shoulders forward and let out a heavy sigh, deliberately projecting an aura of total defeat. "I came to apologize, Chloe," I said, making my voice sound broken and exhausted. "You and Marcus were right. I have absolutely nothing left. My bank accounts are frozen, and I am so tired of fighting this family." Chloe's defensive posture instantly relaxed. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face, cracking the dry clay mask. "The golden child loved nothing more than watching me surrender. I knew you would finally break," she sneered, looking down at me with absolute contempt. "You thought you were so smart. But Brad is a brilliant Wall Street banker. You can never outsmart my husband." I looked down, playing my part perfectly. "Brad is ruthless," I whispered softly. "But I bet he does not even share his real wealth with you. Men like him always hide their true assets from their wives. He probably locks you out of his phone so you cannot see his private offshore accounts." Chloe laughed loudly, an arrogant sound. "You are so pathetic, Maya," she gloated, leaning forward. "You know absolutely nothing about my marriage. Brad is completely obsessed with me. He does not hide anything. He is so devoted that his personal phone passcode is literally my exact birth date, 08-1290. He set it the day we got married to prove I am the only thing that matters to him." I kept my head down, hiding the sharp, genuine smile forming on my lips. 08-1290. It was perfectly arrogant. She had just handed me the master key to dismantle her entire life. I slowly stood up, pulling the white towel off my head. My defeated posture completely vanished, replaced by cold, calculating confidence. "Thank you for the spa chat, Chloe," I said, my voice ringing with sudden, sharp authority. "I will see you at the gala tonight." Chloe looked deeply confused, her triumphant smile fading into sudden panic. "Wait, what are you talking about?" she stammered. I did not answer her. I opened the heavy glass door and walked out into the cool air, leaving her alone in the suffocating heat. I had the ledger, the server files, the VIP badge, and now the final digital key. The sun set over the city, transforming the skyline into a glittering backdrop for the corporate event of the decade. I did not wear the cheap conservative suits my family always ridiculed. I reached into the garment bag I had salvaged and pulled out a stunning floor-length emerald green silk gown. I had purchased it months ago with my own hard-earned bonus, ignoring Chloe's snide comments about my fashion choices. I paired it with elegant gold heels and pulled my hair back into a sleek style. I looked absolutely nothing like the defeated scapegoat Marcus had tried to destroy. I looked like a woman who owned the room. I took a cab to the downtown Grand Hotel. The entrance was swarming with local media, flashing cameras, and valet attendants. I walked confidently up the red carpet, ignoring the curious stares of the paparazzi. I reached the main security checkpoint, where two armed guards flanked the ballroom doors. I held my breath and pressed the thick plastic VIP badge Father Gregory had given me against the digital scanner. A bright green light flashed and the scanner emitted a cheerful beep. The guards stepped aside, pulling the heavy oak doors open for me. The grand ballroom was breathtaking. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of wealthy guests. Waiters carrying silver trays of expensive champagne wove through the crowd of Wall Street elites and high-ranking church officials. It was a sickening blend of fake holiness and corporate greed. I scanned the room and quickly spotted my targets. Marcus was standing near the front wearing a custom tuxedo and laughing loudly with politicians. Chloe was clinging to Brad's arm wearing a diamond necklace undoubtedly paid for by my stolen trust fund. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began walking slowly toward the center of the room. Chloe saw me first. Her jaw dropped and she aggressively tugged on Brad's sleeve, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. Brad spun around, his arrogant smile completely vanishing the second his eyes locked onto mine. His pale face flushed with sudden violent anger. He immediately raised his hand and snapped his fingers, signaling his private security detail stationed near the stage. 3 large men wearing dark suits and earpieces immediately began pushing through the crowded ballroom, heading straight for me. Brad excused himself from his wealthy investors and marched furiously in my direction, trying desperately to intercept me before I reached the VIP tables. He cut me off just as I stepped onto the edge of the main dining area. The 3 security guards quickly surrounded me, forming a tight, intimidating wall of muscle. "How the hell did you get in here?" Brad hissed, his voice trembling with contained rage. He looked me up and down, taking in my expensive gown and my unwavering confidence. "Grab her!" Brad ordered the guards in a harsh whisper. "Drag her out the back exit and call the police immediately. She is illegally trespassing and currently has a federal warrant out for drug possession." The largest security guard reached out to grab my bare shoulder. I did not flinch, and I did not step back. I simply shifted my gaze past Brad's sweating face and locked eyes with the tall, distinguished older gentleman standing directly behind him. I knew exactly who the man was. It was Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire chief executive officer of the international holding company purchasing Vanguard. He held the power to authorize the $40 million transfer. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell," I announced loudly, stepping neatly around Brad's blocking arm and confidently extending my right hand toward the billionaire. "My name is Maya Sterling. I am the lead forensic auditor actively investigating Vanguard Holdings for massive federal tax evasion and offshore money laundering." The entire VIP section went completely dead silent. The classical music seemed to fade away as dozens of powerful investors turned to stare at us. Brad's face drained of all color, turning completely white. "Mr. Caldwell, please ignore this woman," Brad stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "She is a mentally unstable relative. Security is removing her right now." Harrison Caldwell completely ignored Brad. The older billionaire lowered his crystal glass of scotch and looked at me with sharp, calculating eyes. He took in my professional demeanor and the absolute certainty in my voice. He looked at the massive security guards closing in around me and then back at Brad's terrified, sweating face. Caldwell raised one commanding hand instantly, halting the security team in their tracks. "Stop right there," Caldwell ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Do not touch her." He turned his piercing gaze back to me, stepping away from Brad. "You have my full attention, Miss Sterling. Let her speak." "I appreciate your time." "Mr. Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level so only he and Brad could hear me. "I am not going to cause a scene on this floor. I am simply going to give you a piece of free financial advice. Do not sign a single piece of paper tonight. The $40 million sitting in Vanguard Holdings is stolen money. If you absorb that shell company, your entire international conglomerate will be directly implicated in a massive federal money laundering investigation." Brad lunged forward, his face contorted with panic. "Do not listen to her, Harrison. She is completely insane." Caldwell held up his hand, silencing Brad instantly. He looked at me with a calculating expression. "That is an incredibly bold accusation, Miss Sterling. Do you have physical proof of this alleged fraud?" I smiled tightly. I have something much better than physical proof, Mr. Caldwell. I have live digital verification. Just keep your eyes on the main presentation screens in exactly 5 minutes. Before Brad could formulate another pathetic lie, the heavy ballroom lights suddenly dimmed. A hush fell over the wealthy crowd as a spotlight hit the grand stage at the front of the room. The event coordinator spoke through the sound system announcing the opening remarks from the founder of the charity initiative, Bishop Marcus. The crowd erupted into polite applause. Caldwell gave me one final evaluating look before turning his attention toward the stage. Brad was completely paralyzed with fear, desperately trying to figure out what I was planning. I did not give him the chance. I immediately slipped backward into the dense crowd, using the dim lighting to completely vanish from their sight. I moved quickly along the velvet-lined walls, heading straight for the back access corridor. I pushed through a set of heavy double doors and sprinted up a narrow flight of carpeted stairs leading directly to the audiovisual control booth overlooking the entire ballroom. I slowly opened the booth door. A young technician wearing headphones was sitting at the massive mixing board, monitoring the live camera feeds of my father on stage. I needed absolute control of those screens, and I did not have time to negotiate. I stepped into the room, grabbed a heavy metal flashlight resting on a nearby equipment rack, and brought the blunt end down hard against the back of his padded chair. The loud crack startled him so badly he jolted backward, hitting his head against the soundboard and slumping to the floor completely unconscious. I quickly dragged him out of the way and locked the heavy booth door, throwing the deadbolt. I dropped my bag onto the console and pulled out the cloned church hard drive, plugging it directly into the main presentation server. Then I pulled out my laptop and prepared the connection. I needed the final bridge to completely expose them. I synced the Executive Vanguard Holdings portal to the main feed and entered the exact passcode Chloe had bragged about in the sauna. 081290. The portal unlocked immediately, granting me full live access to the offshore bank accounts. I seamlessly linked the portal and the encrypted church documents to the massive LED screens hanging above the main stage. Through the soundproof glass window, I watched Marcus pacing back and forth under the bright spotlight. He was in his element, delivering a flawless, hypocritical performance. For over 30 years, I have guided this community with a steady hand, Marcus boomed into his microphone, his voice echoing through the massive ballroom. We have built houses of worship, we have funded orphanages, and we have created a legacy of absolute purity. But my time as a leader is coming to a close. Tonight, I am officially announcing my retirement. The crowd gasped and clapped warmly. Marcus smiled benevolently, extending his arms toward the VIP tables. I am passing my financial and spiritual legacy to the next generation. My beautiful daughter Chloe and her brilliant husband Brad. Please come up here and join me. Chloe practically floated up the stage stairs, waving to the wealthy investors like a beauty queen. Brad followed her, stumbling slightly, his eyes darting frantically around the dark room looking for me. Marcus wrapped his arms around both of them, turning to face the audience with a massive, proud smile. As we finalize this historic corporate merger tonight, I want everyone to know that God has blessed this family with absolute integrity. That was my exact cue. I sat down in the technician's chair and slammed my finger onto the execute button. The bright corporate logos on the massive screens behind them instantly vanished. The ballroom plunged into total darkness for a split second before the screens blared back to life. Hovering 30 feet in the air for every single billionaire reporter and investor to see was the high-resolution scan of the Locker 6 document. The original birth certificate proving Marcus was a complete fraud. The collective gasp from the ballroom floor was deafening. Hundreds of wealthy investors and local politicians stared up at the massive bright screens in absolute shock. The high-resolution image of my original birth certificate glowed relentlessly, casting a harsh white light over Marcus and his perfectly tailored tuxedo. I did not stay in the control booth to watch their confusion. I grabbed a wireless microphone resting on the technical console, unlocked the heavy door, and walked briskly down the carpeted stairs. I pushed through the velvet curtains and stepped directly onto the polished wood of the main stage. Marcus was completely frozen. His jaw hung slightly open as he stared at the undeniable proof of his 30-year lie. Chloe was trembling, clutching the fabric of her expensive gown. I walked right past them, holding the microphone firmly in my hand, and turned to face the sea of shocked faces. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing loudly and clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "My name is Maya Sterling. The man standing behind me, Bishop Marcus, is not my father. He is the former accountant for my real parents, David and Elena Sterling. When they died in a tragic and highly suspicious car crash 30 years ago, Marcus forged adoption papers and a fake will to steal my $40 million trust fund. He built his entire holy empire on the graves of the people who trusted him." Murmurs of horror and disbelief rippled through the massive ballroom. Harrison Caldwell stood near the front row, his eyes narrowed as he listened to every single word. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He quickly lunged toward me, his face twisted with genuine panic and absolute uncontrollable rage. "Turn that screen off right now," he bellowed, trying to snatch the microphone from my hand. I effortlessly sidestepped his clumsy attack without looking back. I pressed a single button on the wireless presentation clicker I had taken from the audio-visual booth. The massive screens behind us instantly shifted. The birth certificate disappeared and was immediately replaced by a complex yet incredibly clear financial flowchart. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It displayed every single bank account routing number and wire transfer I had uncovered from the church server and the hidden ledger. "I want you all to look very closely at the screen," I commanded, pointing up at the glaring digital evidence. "For over 3 decades, this man has stood behind a pulpit and demanded your absolute faith. He demanded your weekly tithes, your building fund donations, and your charitable offerings. He told the hard-working people of our community that their money was going to build youth centers and fund local outreach programs. But numbers do not lie. And as a senior forensic auditor, I followed every single dime. The screens flashed again, showing massive red arrows connecting the church bank accounts directly to a complex web of offshore corporate entities. Every single offering, every single dollar given by the Black community in pure faith was immediately funneled out of the church, I explained, pacing across the stage. Marcus transferred those millions directly into Vanguard Holdings. And who exactly owns Vanguard Holdings? The screen shifted one final time, revealing the official corporate registration documents. The owner is not a charity. The owner is Brad. The crowd erupted. Outraged shouts echoed through the room. Several church elders who had been invited to the gala stood up from their tables, pointing angrily at Marcus and Brad. They finally saw the horrific truth. Their beloved spiritual leader had systematically robbed their community for decades solely to enrich a privileged white Wall Street banker who despised them. The visual proof was absolutely undeniable. Brad was sweating profusely. His tailored suit looked suddenly too tight. He realized his entire career, his wealth, and his freedom were evaporating right before his eyes. He grabbed a microphone from the podium and desperately tried to regain control of the room. "Do not listen to a single word she says," Brad screamed, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "She is completely insane. Look at her. She is just a bitter adopted orphan who is jealous of our success. She manipulated these documents to ruin this historic merger. This is a targeted cyber attack." The entire room fell completely silent as everyone waited to see exactly how I would respond to his frantic accusation. I did not yell and I did not flinch. I turned to face my arrogant brother-in-law. A slow and very cold smile spread across my face. "You want to talk about targeted attacks, Brad?" I asked calmly, my voice projecting clearly into the silent ballroom. "Let us look at your personal bank records then, Brad." I pressed the button on the wireless remote one more time. The massive screens above the stage flickered and instantly pulled up a live feed of Brad's highly classified offshore banking portfolio. I did not just have static screenshots. I had the live portal completely unlocked using his exact birthdate passcode. The numbers on the screen were actively updating. I pointed the laser pointer at the staggering balances. Here we have a direct line from the church building fund into a Cayman Island account registered entirely under Brad's personal social security number, I announced. And right below that, you will see the recent withdrawal of $300,000 to purchase a luxury yacht charter. It seems the church donation plate paid for your summer vacation, Chloe. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She stepped away from Brad as if he were suddenly radioactive. Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire chief executive, stepped forward. His face was a mask of pure cold fury. He looked at the live bank routing numbers and recognized the undeniable digital footprint of massive corporate fraud. He pulled his cell phone from his tailored jacket pocket and dialed his lead corporate attorney. "Cancel the Vanguard acquisition immediately," Caldwell barked into the phone loud enough for the first few rows of VIP guests to hear. "The entire deal is completely void. Notify the board that we are immediately severing all ties with Brad's firm." Caldwell lowered the phone and looked directly at Brad with absolute disgust. "You are completely finished," he stated coldly. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Brad. His massive payday was gone. His elite Wall Street career was completely destroyed. His fake image of superiority was shattered into a million pieces. In that moment of ultimate panic, Brad completely lost his mind. He snatched the microphone from the podium, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face was flushed crimson red, and his expensive silk tie was suddenly crooked. He looked out at the angry crowd, and his deeply ingrained white privilege violently erupted. "Sit down, all of you!" Brad screamed, his voice echoing harshly through the massive ballroom. He pointed an aggressive, shaking finger at the church elders and the prominent black community leaders who were standing near the front tables demanding answers. "You all need to sit down and shut your mouths right now," Brad ordered, his tone dripping with absolute racial contempt. "You people have absolutely no idea how high-level finance works. You should be thanking me. I took your pathetic little neighborhood church donations and I actually managed them. I put them into real investments. I am the victim here. This is a targeted cyber attack by a bitter, jealous woman who could not make it in the real corporate world." He paced frantically across the stage, pointing wildly at me. "Do not listen to her," Brad shouted desperately. "She is a criminal. She is a liar. I am a senior vice president at a major investment firm. I have the pedigree and the education. You are all just ignorant pawns in her pathetic revenge fantasy. Guards, remove her from this stage immediately." Brad looked at the private security team standing at the edge of the stage. He expected them to blindly obey his orders. He expected his wealthy status and his skin color to act as an impenetrable shield. But the security guards did not move a single muscle. They looked at the massive digital screens displaying his federal crimes, and then they looked at Harrison Caldwell, who gave a sharp shake of his head. The guards simply crossed their arms and stepped back, leaving Brad entirely alone on the stage. The backlash from the crowd was instantaneous and completely overwhelming. The polite, quiet atmosphere of the billionaire gala vanished. The wealthy investors turned their backs on him in total disgust. The church elders who had known me since I was a little girl began shouting furiously at Marcus and Brad, demanding their stolen money back. The black guests, who Brad had just tried to violently silence, refused to sit down. They stepped forward, closing in around the front of the stage, forming a solid wall of righteous anger. Brad's ultimate attempt to use his privilege to silence the truth had completely backfired. He was no longer the powerful Wall Street titan. He was just a terrified, exposed thief, surrounded by the very people he had confidently robbed. Marcus dropped to his knees on the polished wood floor, burying his face in his hands, as his entire fake holy empire crumbled to dust around him. Chloe was openly weeping, ruining her perfect makeup, completely ignoring her husband. I stood perfectly still, watching them drown in the chaotic mess they had created. I did not need to say another word. The live financial portal on the screen behind me said absolutely everything that needed to be said. Suddenly, a loud, piercing sound cut through the angry shouts of the ballroom crowd. It started as a faint wail in the distance, but quickly grew into a deafening roar. Sirens, dozens of them. The flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles violently illuminated the high arched windows of the Grand Hotel ballroom, casting an eerie strobe effect across the dark room. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance burst open with tremendous force. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents wearing dark jackets with the bold yellow letters FBI and IRS printed across their backs swarmed into the elegant room. The authorities had thoroughly reviewed my encrypted files, and they had arrived to collect their targets. Heavy oak doors slammed against the walls as the federal agents flooded the grand ballroom. The lead agent stepped forward holding a thick stack of warrants. "Nobody move!" she shouted, her voice easily, cutting through the remaining chaos. "We have federal warrants for the immediate arrest of Bradley Jenkins and Marcus Sterling on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. We also have injunctions to seize all Vanguard Holdings assets." Brad backed away from the edge of the stage, his hands raised defensively in the air. The arrogant Wall Street banker who threatened me was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified coward. As two armed agents climbed the stairs pulling heavy steel handcuffs from their belts, Brad completely broke. The illusion of his loyalty and his superiority shattered into a million pathetic pieces. "Wait, you do not understand," Brad screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I am not the mastermind here. I am just a financial advisor. Marcus forced me to do it. He brought the stolen church money to my firm and threatened to ruin my career if I did not wash it. I was under extreme duress." The lead agent did not even pause her advance. "Save it for the judge, Mr. Jenkins," she said coldly. "I am cooperating," Brad yelled, pointing a shaking finger at his father-in-law. "Marcus is the one who orchestrated the fake adoption. He orchestrated the car crash. I have audio recordings to prove it. I will give you everything you need to lock him up forever." Brad spun around and pointed at his own wife. "Chloe spent all the money. She is the one who demanded the yachts and the luxury cars. She knew exactly where the money was coming from. Arrest her too. Just give me immunity and I will testify against both of them right now." Chloe stood frozen, staring at the man she proudly flaunted. The perfect white knight she believed would protect her had just violently thrown her to the federal wolves. The sheer betrayal hit her harder than any physical blow could ever manage. Her face twisted with a mixture of profound heartbreak and absolute explosive rage. "You pathetic coward!" Chloe screamed, stepping forward and swinging her arm with all her might. Her open palm struck Brad's face with a loud, sickening crack. The force sent his expensive glasses flying across the stage. Brad stumbled backward, clutching his rapidly swelling cheek. "You promised me we were invincible!" Chloe sobbed hysterically, swinging at him again before a federal agent grabbed her arms and pulled her firmly backward. "You used my family to get rich, and now you are abandoning me. You are nothing but a weak, pathetic liar." Brad did not even look at her. He kept his hands raised toward the federal agents, begging for a plea deal as they roughly yanked his arms behind his back and locked the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The wealthy investors in the ballroom watched in stunned silence as the elite financial genius was reduced to a crying informant. While the agents focused on subduing Brad and calming a hysterical Chloe, I kept my eyes focused on the actual architect of my misery, Marcus. He had not said a single word since the agents breached the doors. He knew the absolute reality of his situation. With the live financial data displayed on the screens behind him and Brad loudly screaming full confessions to the federal authorities, there was no legal loophole left to exploit. There was no congregation left to manipulate. His 30-year reign of religious terror was completely over. I watched Marcus slowly step backward, inching his way toward the thick velvet curtains hanging at the rear of the stage. He moved with the quiet, desperate stealth of a trapped animal. While the agents were reading Brad his Miranda rights, Marcus slipped behind the heavy fabric, completely disappearing from the main stage. He was heading straight for the rear service corridor that led directly to the private loading dock and the alleyway. I did not shout for the agents. I did not point him out to the crowd. I simply turned and walked calmly down the side steps of the stage, bypassing the chaotic scene of my sister screaming at her arrested husband. I knew exactly where that service corridor ended. Marcus pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, his breathing heavy and erratic. He scrambled down the dark cement hallway, desperately reaching for the heavy metal exit door that led to freedom. He threw his weight against the crash bar, pushing the heavy door open to the cool night air. But he did not step outside. He stopped dead in his tracks. I was already standing right there, filling the doorway. The cool night air rushed in, swirling around the heavy silk of my green gown. Marcus stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically past my shoulders, looking for a clear escape route into the dark alleyway. When he realized the alley was already blocked by two unmarked federal vehicles with their lights flashing silently, his shoulders slumped. But the defeat only lasted for a fraction of a second. The holy, benevolent bishop, the man who had commanded thousands of followers with his gentle voice, completely vanished. The mask fell away, leaving only the ruthless, greedy murderer standing in the dim light of the service corridor. "Move out of my way, Maya," he snarled, his voice dropping into a vicious guttural register I had never heard before. He took a threatening step forward, his hands balling into tight fists. I did not move a single inch. I stood my ground, looking at the man who had stolen my entire life. "You are not going anywhere, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "The entire building is completely surrounded. It is finally over." Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the concrete walls. "You really think you have won?" he spat, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You think projecting some stolen digital files on a screen makes you a genius? You are nothing, Maya. You were always nothing but a convenient little pawn to me. A necessary legal loophole to get my hands on David and Elena's empire. I never loved you. I despised every single second I had to pretend you were my daughter." Hearing him say my real parents' names with such casual contempt made my blood run cold, but I kept my face entirely expressionless. "You murdered them," I stated plainly, not asking a question, but declaring a final, verified fact. "They were weak." Marcus sneered, his face twisting with absolute arrogance. "They had $40 million and they wanted to give it away to charity. They wanted to build community centers and affordable housing. It was a pathetic waste of true wealth. I took what I rightfully deserved because I was the one who actually knew how to multiply it. I built a massive empire while you were busy playing the pathetic little victim in the tiny bedroom I generously gave you. I gave you food and shelter when I could have easily left you in that crashed car to die with them." He leaned in close, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated malice. "You might have ruined my gala tonight, Maya, but you will never actually get the empire back. I have layers of corporate protection you cannot even begin to comprehend. Even if I go to federal prison, that money is legally locked up in Vanguard Holdings forever. You will never see a single dime of it. You will go back to being a broke, lonely accountant living in a tiny rented apartment." I let him finish his arrogant rant. I let him feel that final, desperate surge of false superiority. Then I slowly reached into the small beaded clutch hanging from my wrist. I pulled out a thick, folded document bearing the official raised seal of the United States Federal Court. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases, and held it up right in front of his sweating face. "You are an incredibly arrogant man, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "But you are a terrible accountant. You forgot that forensic auditors do not just look at the numbers. We look at the absolute legal foundation of the numbers." Marcus squinted at the heavy legal document, his eyes scanning the bold black text. His face suddenly drained of all remaining color. "This is an emergency federal injunction signed by a federal judge exactly 2 hours ago," I explained clearly. "Because I provided the original birth certificate, the witness testimony of Father Gregory, and the complete digital money trail, the federal court immediately recognized me as the sole surviving heir to the Sterling estate. I did not just expose Vanguard Holdings tonight, Marcus. I legally seized it. Every single asset, every property, and every offshore bank account has been permanently transferred back into my real family name. You own absolutely nothing. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hands began to shake violently as the absolute totality of his destruction finally registered in his brain. He had completely lost everything. His freedom, his reputation, and his stolen fortune were all gone in a single night. The heavy doors behind him suddenly burst open. Federal agents rushed in, slamming him against the wall. Handcuffs clicked, locking him away. The heavy doors behind him suddenly burst open. Federal agents rushed in, slamming him against the wall. Handcuffs clicked, locking him away. 3 weeks later, the thick steel door of the federal interrogation room buzzed loudly before sliding open. I stepped into the sterile, windowless room wearing my sharpest tailored charcoal suit. The air inside was completely stagnant, smelling faintly of harsh bleach and stale sweat. It was a massive departure from the opulent glass corner offices and luxury spa retreats he was accustomed to. Sitting on the opposite side of the bolted metal table was the man who had constantly reminded me of his elite status and his untouchable privilege. Brad looked absolutely pathetic. His expensive custom suits and silk ties had been permanently replaced by a scratchy, oversized orange prison jumpsuit. The bright fabric hung loosely off his shoulders, making his usually imposing frame look incredibly small and frail. His perfectly styled blonde hair was greasy flat and completely unkempt. Deep dark purple bags hung heavily under his bloodshot, terrified eyes. He looked up when I entered the room, and the sheer desperation on his face was entirely undeniable. The lead federal prosecutor had allowed me this brief private meeting as a professional courtesy. I had handed them the most perfectly documented financial fraud case of the decade, saving them months of exhausting investigative work. I pulled out the cold metal chair and sat down, folding my hands neatly on the table. I did not speak right away. I let the suffocating silence stretch out, forcing Brad to sit in his own agonizing discomfort. "Maya, please," Brad finally whispered, his voice raspy and shaking. He leaned forward, the heavy metal chains around his wrists and ankles clinking loudly against the table. "You have to help me. You have to talk to the lead prosecutor. They are trying to throw the absolute maximum sentence at me. They are talking about 20 to 30 years in a maximum security facility. You know I would never survive in a place like that. I am not built for this. I am a wealthy Wall Street banker. I belong in a minimum security white-collar camp, not a federal penitentiary." I stared at him, keeping my expression entirely flat. "You should have thought about your delicate constitution before you decided to launder $40 million belonging to a murdered family, Brad," I replied coldly. "You should have thought about it before you illegally evicted me from my own apartment and tried to have corrupt police officers frame me for a felony drug possession. Your white privilege cannot buy your way out of federal tax evasion." Brad squeezed his eyes shut, tears of absolute self-pity leaking down his pale cheeks. "I was completely desperate," he pleaded, shaking his head frantically. "Marcus manipulated me. He is a master manipulator, Maya. You know that better than anyone. He threatened to completely destroy my career if I did not help him wash the church donations. I was just following his orders to protect my family." "Protect your family," I repeated, letting a sharp, mocking laugh escape my lips. "You threw your wife under the bus the absolute second those federal agents walked into the ballroom. You screamed that she spent all the money while you were being handcuffed. You are not a protector, Brad. You are a greedy parasite who finally got caught draining the host. I can give you everything," Maya, Brad begged, leaning even closer across the table, his eyes wide and frantic. "I know exactly where Marcus buried the original paper files from 30 years ago. I know the names of the corrupt city officials he paid off to falsify your parents' accident report. I know every single dirty politician on his church payroll. If you tell the prosecutor to offer me a generous plea deal, I will testify against all of them. I will stand up in federal court and give you Marcus on a silver platter. I will be your star witness. Just please get me out of this orange jumpsuit and tell them to reduce my sentence." He looked at me with wild, hopeful eyes, genuinely believing he still had something of immense value to offer. He still thought he could negotiate his way out of a corner, just like he did when he was stealing from the black community. He fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamic in this room. I slowly leaned back in my metal chair, looking at him with absolute pity. You really do not get it, do you, Brad? I do not need your desperate testimony. I do not need a star witness to stand up in federal court and point fingers at a corrupt bishop. Brad froze, his frantic breathing catching heavily in his throat. What are you talking about? He stammered. I am a senior forensic auditor, I stated clearly, my voice ringing with total authority in the small concrete room. My math was completely flawless. I handed the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation a digital roadmap so clear that a first-year law student could win this case. The financial data alone guarantees Marcus will never see the outside of a prison cell ever again. I already found the secret payoffs to the city officials in your hidden Vanguard ledger. I already handed over the names of every corrupt politician on his payroll. You have absolutely zero leverage, Brad. You are completely useless to me, and you are completely useless to the federal government. Brad stared at me, his jaw slack, as the final remaining shred of his hope completely evaporated into thin air. He slumped back into his hard metal chair, utterly defeated and broken. I stood up from the table, picking up my leather briefcase. I smoothed my tailored blazer and looked down at the ruined man sitting before me. Enjoy your 20-year sentence, Brad, I said, turning my back on him and walking straight toward the heavy steel door. I did not look back as I knocked twice, signaling the guards to let me out. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind me, separating me from Brad and his pathetic begging forever. I walked out of the federal detention center and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The massive legal machine I had set into motion was running perfectly on its own. I hailed a private car and headed toward the downtown financial district. As the legal owner of the newly reclaimed Sterling estate, I had immediately liquidated the bloated Vanguard Holdings office space and moved my personal residence into the crown jewel of my real parents' property portfolio. It was a stunning top-floor luxury penthouse overlooking the entire city skyline, a place that represented my true legacy. When my driver pulled into the secure underground parking garage of the building, I stepped out and headed toward the private elevator lobby. The polished marble walls echoed sharply with the sound of my heels. But as I approached the heavy glass security doors, a frantic figure stepped out from the damp shadows, shivering uncontrollably. It was Chloe. The golden child was completely unrecognizable. Her perfect blonde hair was matted and plastered to her cheeks from the freezing rain outside. She was wearing a thin designer silk trench coat that was soaked entirely through, and her expensive makeup was smeared heavily under her bloodshot eyes. The iconic red bottom heels she loved to flaunt were ruined, covered in street mud. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant woman who had threatened me with a brass paperweight just a few weeks ago. "Maya!" she gasped, her voice cracking violently as she stumbled toward the glass doors. "Please wait. Do not go upstairs yet." I stopped and looked at her through the thick security glass. I did not reach for my keycard. I just watched her shiver. Chloe pressed her bare hands against the cold glass. "They took everything, Maya," she sobbed openly, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "The federal agents seized our house. They froze all of my personal bank accounts. My premium credit cards are completely declined. I have absolutely nowhere to go. The lawyers are telling me I am facing serious accessory charges because my signature was on the yacht charter and the luxury vehicle leases. I need money for a criminal defense attorney, Maya. I need a warm place to sleep tonight." I slowly pushed the heavy glass door open just a few inches. The bitter wind swept into the warm lobby. "Why would you ever come to me, Chloe?" I asked, my voice perfectly flat, devoid of any sympathy. "You spent your entire life mocking me. You happily spent the trust fund that was stolen from my murdered parents. You watched your husband illegally evict me from my apartment, and you laughed about it on a luxury yacht." Chloe fell to her knees on the cold concrete, clasping her hands together in a desperate pleading gesture. Because we are still sisters, Maya, she cried desperately, trying to play the ultimate emotional card. We grew up in the exact same house. We shared the same bedroom when we were little. You are the only family I have left. Marcus will not even take my collect calls from the county jail. You have $40 million now. You can easily afford to help me. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood out here on the cold street. I looked down at her pathetic weeping form. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. We were never sisters, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. You were the favored guest in a house built entirely on my parents' graves. You never viewed me as family when you held all the power and the wealth. You only view me as a sister right now because you desperately need a new bank to fund your survival. I am not Marcus. I am not Brad. And I am certainly not your savior. I stepped back inside the warm lobby and let the heavy glass door swing shut. It clicked loudly, locking her out in the freezing rain. Chloe slammed her fists against the glass, screaming my name, but the thick soundproof barrier muffled her cries completely. I turned my back on her and stepped into my private elevator, pressing the button for the penthouse. The elevator doors opened to my massive, sunlit living room. I walked over to the sleek kitchen island and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. Before I could even take a single sip, my phone began buzzing violently on the marble counter. It was not just one text message, it was a massive coordinated flood. My screen lit up with dozens of rapid notifications from the exact same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had publicly humiliated me at Big Mama's house. Uncle Ray sent a long paragraph explaining how he always secretly knew Marcus was a fraud and asking for a small $50,000 loan to start his new business. Aunt Denise texted a picture of me when I was a toddler, claiming she always loved me the most and begging me to help pay off the foreclosure on the family home. The sheer hypocrisy was absolutely breathtaking. They had willingly shunned me when I was homeless and desperate. Now that I controlled a $40 million empire, they were suddenly eager to welcome me back into the family fold with open arms. I did not read the rest of their pathetic messages. I set my crystal glass down and opened the contact settings on my phone. I systematically clicked on Uncle Ray's name and pressed block. Then I blocked Aunt Denise. Then Big Mama. I went down the entire contact list, erasing every single toxic relative who had ever doubted me or defended my abusers. Within 5 minutes, my phone was completely silent. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the massive city that now belonged to me. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the massive city that now belonged to me. The view was breathtaking, but the real work was just beginning. The $40 million real estate empire was finally back under the Sterling name, but it remained infected with greedy parasites Marcus had installed over 3 decades. The very next morning, I walked into the main corporate boardroom of the newly rebranded Sterling Holdings. Sitting around the massive mahogany table were the 12 members of the executive board. These wealthy, corrupt men had blindly authorized Brad's offshore accounts and happily looked the other way while Marcus bled his congregation dry. They looked up at me with arrogant annoyance and nervous hesitation. They assumed because I was a young black woman, I would take my newly acquired wealth and quietly let them continue running the daily operations. They were catastrophically wrong. I remained standing, dropping a thick stack of manila folders directly onto the polished wood. Inside those folders are the detailed records of every single fiduciary duty you deliberately breached. I announced, my voice carrying absolute cold authority. I know exactly how much each of you received in illegal kickbacks from the Vanguard Shell Company. I know about the inflated vendor contracts and luxury vehicles you expensed to the church charity fund. The room erupted into outraged shouting. The chairman of the board slammed his fist on the table, demanding respect and threatening massive wrongful termination lawsuits. I simply smiled and tapped the folders. You can absolutely try to sue me, I replied calmly, but I highly recommend you spend that retainer on criminal defense attorneys instead. These folders have already been copied and sent to the federal prosecutor's office. You are all fired effective immediately. Security will escort you to your vehicles. Any attempt to access the corporate servers will be treated as a federal crime. Have a blessed day, gentlemen. Within an hour, the boardroom was empty and the real cleansing began. I did not want to hoard the wealth Marcus had stolen. I wanted to restore the community he systematically destroyed. I hired brilliant young independent auditors and set up a massive command center on the executive floor. For 2 months, I used every forensic accounting skill I had ever learned to meticulously trace the millions of dollars stolen from the church congregation. I tracked building fund donations that never built a single community center. I tracked scholarship funds that went straight to Chloe's designer wardrobe. I tracked modest tithes given by elderly widows who could barely afford groceries. I compiled an encrypted database of every single victim. Then I began writing checks. I personally visited the homes of the families Marcus had scammed. I sat in their living rooms, drank sweet tea, and handed them certified cashier's checks, returning every dime they sacrificed to his fake holy empire, plus a generous interest payment from the sterling corporate funds. The tears of relief from those hard-working families became the greatest return on investment I could ever imagine. I was no longer just a forensic auditor crunching numbers in a dark room. I had finally become a true restorer of stolen legacies. When the final check was delivered and the community was made whole, I realized there was only one last debt I needed to pay. I drove out to the quiet green hills of the city's oldest cemetery. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns as I walked down the stone paths. I had never been allowed to visit this place. Marcus always told me my parents were buried in an unmarked pauper grave, claiming he heroically saved me from absolute destitution. But the original legal documents from Locker 6 gave me the exact plot coordinates. I stopped at the crest of a small hill under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. Resting in the soft grass was a beautiful double headstone carved from solid dark granite. David and Elena Sterling, beloved parents, taken too soon. I sank to my knees on the damp earth, running my fingers over the deeply engraved letters of their names. A heavy lump formed in my throat, but the tears that fell from my eyes were not tears of pain or bitter resentment. They were tears of profound, overwhelming peace. I had fought the war they were brutally murdered for, and I had completely won. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the rusted brass key Father Gregory pressed into my hand on the day of the funeral. The tiny piece of metal had unlocked the truth and dismantled an entire corrupt empire. I smiled softly and gently placed the key on top of the cold granite headstone right between their names. The cool breeze rustled through the ancient oak tree above me, carrying away the last heavy remnants of my past. I stood up, brushed the damp earth from my knees, and walked back down the hill. I was finally ready to look toward the future. A few months later, I stood outside the massive brick building that used to be Marcus's mega church. The giant gilded cross that once dominated the roof had been completely dismantled and sold. The extravagant crystal chandeliers and the velvet offering plates that were used to systematically drain the community had been auctioned off to fund the massive interior renovation. We gutted the entire extravagant sanctuary, stripping away the opulent theater of false worship and replacing it with something deeply practical and profoundly real. The heavy oak front doors swung open, revealing the new Sterling Community and Financial Literacy Center. Where the massive acrylic pulpit used to stand, we had constructed a state-of-the-art lecture hall. The dark server room where Chloe had once tried to violently attack me was now a bustling computer lab filled with brand-new machines. The luxurious private offices where Marcus and Brad used to scheme were transformed into free legal clinics and small business incubators specifically designed for African American youth and aspiring local entrepreneurs. I walked through the brightly lit hallways, listening to the incredible sounds of a community actually thriving. In one room, a team of certified accountants I had personally hired was teaching a packed class of high school students how to accurately read a balance sheet and build a sustainable stock portfolio. In another room, a local attorney was helping single mothers navigate the complex process of securing small business loans without falling into high-interest debt traps. There were no emotional manipulations, no forced tithes, and absolutely no guilt trips. Everything was entirely free, fully funded by the trust fund Marcus had tried to violently steal. I made my way down the central aisle of the main lecture hall. It was opening day for our Advanced Financial Defense seminar, and the room was packed to absolute capacity. Hundreds of people from the neighborhood had shown up. Some were the exact same people who had shouted at me during the hotel gala, but they were no longer brainwashed followers acting out of blind, terrified allegiance. They were informed, empowered citizens, eager to take back total control of their financial destinies. I stepped up to the simple wooden podium. I did not wear a clerical collar, and I did not fake a single tear. I wore my signature tailored charcoal blazer, looking out at the eager faces staring back at me. I gripped the edges of the podium, taking a deep, steadying breath. "Welcome to the Sterling Center!" I began, my voice projecting clearly without the need for artificial theatrical reverb. For over 30 years, you were falsely told that the only way to secure your future was to hand your hard-earned money over to a man who promised you invisible blessings. You were manipulated into believing that poverty was a spiritual test, and that questioning the financial motives of your leaders was a terrible sin. Today, we completely break that toxic cycle forever. The room erupted into genuine enthusiastic applause. People were nodding, leaning forward in their seats, and actively taking notes. Today, we are not going to talk about miracles. I continued, pacing slightly behind the podium. We are going to talk about mortgages. We are going to talk about compound interest corporate auditing and how to spot a predatory loan before it drains your entire family dry. We are going to equip this community with the exact same financial weapons that elite Wall Street bankers use every single day to hoard wealth. Because true freedom does not come from blind faith in corrupt men. True freedom comes from education, ownership, and absolute financial independence. I looked out over the massive crowd, letting the absolute power of those words sink in. My eyes scanned the front row, and a warm, genuine smile spread across my face. Sitting right there in the center seat, wearing a simple gray sweater instead of his heavy, restrictive priestly robes, was Father Gregory. He looked healthier and happier than he had in decades. The heavy, paralyzing burden of a 30-year secret had been completely lifted from his shoulders. He looked up at me and nodded slowly, his eyes shining with pure, unadulterated pride. I looked past him to the teenagers taking furious notes on their laptops, to the resilient mothers holding thick informational packets, and the local business owners actively networking in the aisles. I had spent my entire life feeling like an unwanted outsider, searching desperately for a family that would finally value my true worth. But looking at this room, I realized I never needed Marcus or Chloe or any of the toxic relatives who had so easily cast me aside. I had finally found my true family. They were the beautiful community sitting right in front of me, and we were going to build an unbreakable empire together. That first seminar was a massive success. It set the tone for everything that followed. Over the next year, the Sterling Center became a powerful beacon of absolute hope in a city that desperately needed one. We expanded our programs rapidly to include full university scholarships for young women entering the finance sector, and we began building affordable housing on the vacant lots Marcus had selfishly left to rot. Meanwhile, the federal justice system finalized its heavy work. Marcus was officially sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole. The presiding judge specifically cited his egregious manipulation of the church congregation as a severe aggravating factor. Brad received his 20-year sentence and was shipped off to a harsh concrete facility where his expensive tailored suits and elite Wall Street pedigree meant absolutely nothing to the other inmates. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Chloe was currently working a minimum wage retail job, completely cut off from the luxury she once believed was her divine birthright. I felt no joy in their suffering, but I also felt no lingering guilt. They had simply balanced their own karmic ledgers. I kept the original rusted brass key and the leather-bound ledger securely displayed in a glass case in my penthouse office. They serve as a daily visual reminder of exactly where I came from and exactly what it took to break entirely free from their grasp. Looking back on the 33 years I spent living as an unwanted stranger in my own home, I realized that toxic families rely heavily on deep psychological conditioning. They desperately need a scapegoat to carry the heavy weight of their own personal failures. Marcus and Chloe needed me to feel small, insecure, and financially dependent, so they could easily hide their massive corporate crimes in the dark. They actively programmed me to accept the bare minimum, and they disguised their relentless emotional abuse as tough religious love. They thought they had successfully designed the perfect invisible cage, but they severely underestimated the profound power of someone who deals exclusively in undeniable financial facts. They tried to bury me with a fake will, fake love, and a fake father. But they forgot one thing. Numbers do not lie, and neither does a Black woman who finally knows her true worth. Stepping fully into that worth was the hardest and most painful thing I have ever done. It required walking away from the only family dynamic I had ever known and stepping blindly into a terrifying void. But that empty void was exactly where I discovered my ultimate power. I learned the hard way that you cannot heal in the exact same toxic environment that made you sick in the first place. You have to be willing to tear the entire corrupt structure down to the foundation if you ever want to build something real and lasting. Now I want to turn this conversation over to all of you watching. Life is essentially a massive balance sheet. Every single relationship you have is either a valuable asset that adds to your peace of mind or a massive liability that continuously drains your spirit and your energy. Sometimes the most expensive and damaging liabilities in our lives share our exact last name. Have you ever had to deeply audit your own family and cut out the toxic assets? Have you ever reached a painful breaking point where you realized the cost of keeping the peace was simply too high for your mental health? Have you ever had a partner or an arrogant in-law try to use their money or their privilege to silence you and make you feel entirely worthless? How did you finally find the strength to stand up and reclaim your personal power? Let me know your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one of your stories, and I am constantly inspired by the sheer resilience of this community. We are all navigating complex family dynamics, but sharing our truth openly helps break the heavy silence that toxic people rely on to maintain their control. If my journey resonated with you today, please take a quick moment to hit that like and subscribe button. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with an oppressive family dynamic and needs a firm reminder that they are not crazy and they are definitely not alone. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me today and for allowing me to share my unvarnished truth. Remember, the absolute best revenge is not just surviving the fire they threw you into. It is taking back the empire they stole from you and building a beautiful life they can never touch. Stay strong, stay sharp, and never let them count you out. The most profound lesson to extract from Maya's relentless pursuit of justice is the absolute necessity of auditing our own relationships and reclaiming our self-worth from toxic environments. Maya's journey illustrates a painful but universal truth. The people who are supposed to protect us can sometimes be the ones who benefit the most from keeping us small. For over 3 decades, Maya was conditioned to believe she was a burden. Her family assigned her the role of the scapegoat, using manipulation and manufactured guilt to maintain their power and hide their own destructive behavior. However, Maya's ultimate victory did not just come from uncovering hidden bank accounts or confronting corrupt executives. It began the exact moment she fundamentally rejected the false narrative her abusers had written for her. She realized that blind loyalty to family should never require the sacrifice of her own sanity, dignity, or future. We often tolerate unacceptable behavior from relatives simply because of shared blood or a long history. We allow ourselves to remain in invisible cages because stepping outside them feels like a betrayal. But just as a forensic auditor objectively examines a ledger for discrepancies, we must learn to evaluate the people in our lives based on facts, actions, and mutual respect, rather than just emotional obligations. A relationship that constantly drains your emotional energy, disrespects your boundaries, or relies on your silence is a severe liability. Maya teaches us that walking away from a toxic dynamic is not an act of surrender. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you finally recognize your true value, you strip manipulators of their only weapon against you. Take a moment today to objectively evaluate the relationships in your life and do not hesitate to establish firm boundaries with anyone who constantly diminishes your worth.